Thank you guys so much for being Substack supporters. As promised, here is the rest of our interview with Thomas Frank, and we have a bonus segment where we discuss Joshua Shenk's firing, as well as our kind of cringy, disgusting would you rather discussion.
By the way, do you remember the whole history of the Iraq War? It starts as one thing. It starts as we're going to go get Saddam Hussein, who, remember, the Bush administration was constantly saying they're basically responsible for 9/11.
Yeah.
And it ends as there's this really interesting book on it called We Meant Well. Do you remember this? And it ends Obama is in the White House, Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State, and they change the sort of the reason we're in Iraq, and it is to lift up the women of Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Do you know this? This is he has a whole chapter about it. It's actually, he was, I forget what his position was in Iraq, but it's actually really interesting. And it's we've been heading in that direction for quite a while.
Well, Afghanistan too. That became central to the reason we were staying.
By the way, I found the Zora Neale Hurston, just to return to that, she opposed the New Deal. And she fought with Langston Hughes and Richard Wright. Like, she had a political falling out with them. And her piece about like not being tragic is like very much a bootstrapping like ode to independence, kind of against the handouts that she claims that the New Deal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
she's like
against
really,
the welfare state.
Yes. She's very against the welfare.
So this is not. It's not only that they're not
state.
Embracing this other critique of themselves, they're actively against it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's really, it's kind of amazing.
This is fascinating. Like this is like this. It would take like a
supported
CIA
Taft,
to come up with something
Republican
like this.
Taft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, right?
Yeah, it is.
Tom, there's another thing I wanted to ask you about this in terms of this, because obviously you wrote "What's the Matter with Kansas," which was all about the attitudes of this huge population of basically middle American Republican voters, not the Rockefeller Republicans that New Yorkers know, right? But the other Republicans that are not typically familiar to kind of liberal America, right? And
except it's a stereotype.
Except it's a stereotype. But they've gone through kind of a sea change when it comes to the national security issues. They don't see that as part of their bailiwick anymore. They see themselves as the victim of it, and I just wondered if I had not thought about that, but that's a really interesting. I mean, look, people in Kansas don't talk about foreign policy. The only aspect of it that even remotely interests them is if you get in a war like the Vietnam War and you draft them and send them there, then they'll talk about it. The other aspect of it that interests them.
Don't they talk about Nebraska, foreign policy, Oklahoma, Missouri?
Good. But they care about free trade because they're farmers. So they're huge. Kansas is a huge like wheat exporter, to the rest of the world. And they care about that. That's because the farm economy is literally based on exports. But they don't talk about this stuff at all. Like their knowledge of this is like the same as my knowledge of it. Right? They read spy novels. They don't know a whole lot about it. But you're right that the last couple of years have changed. The last couple of years have changed everything. Did I? I know I showed you this, Matt. I don't know if I showed you, Katie. This I wrote this essay for Le Monde Diplomatique where. It was based on a couple of things that I found in newspapers, and one of them was the Washington Post did an oral history of what they called the resistance. This came out right after the 2020 once it was clear that Biden had won the election. They published this, and they included the CIA as part of the resistance.
No.
Which really, yes, it blew my mind. And there was this whole section about how Trump antagonized the CIA by giving this dumb, and of course, it's not the whole story, but Trump gave this stupid speech at CIA headquarters on like his second or third day in office. And there was a woman who stood outside the CIA and protested Trump's speech. They had her story in the Washington Post. And I was like, damn, that's the left. They're not protesting against the CIA. They're protesting against a politician bad-mouthing the CIA or insulting the CIA. Like, wow, the left has come a long way in this country.
But isn't that a huge kind of switcheroo though? Because
hell yes,
again, to be a liberal, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would just never have imagined yourself being allied with the CIA or
of course
FBI
not. Go back and look at the Nation magazine in those days.
Yeah, exactly,
you know?
right?
Yeah, all that. I mean, after Vietnam, I mean, in the 1970s, the whole country turned against the CIA.
Right, with the church committee hearings and all that
exactly,
stuff.
Exactly. And I'm old enough to remember what that felt like. People didn't even know what the CIA was before those days. And then Watergate and the church committee really really hurt those guys. And I remember, God, I've got a book somewhere. It's called In Search of Enemies, came out in the mid 1970s, sort of excellent analysis of what the CIA was all about.
But right, like that was like one of that along with, and we've talked about the speech thing, but that was one of like the definitional qualities of somebody who was kind of a liberal back then, was you were opposed to the kind of extra legal secret, you know, because remember they had gotten caught not only trying to assassinate foreign leaders, but they had a domestic surveillance program that was illegal in 1975 that came out.
Yeah. Was it, you're talking about COINTELPRO? I think that was the FBI actually, but I'm not.
Well, there was the Family Jewels story that came out in 75. Remember that was Cy Hirsch's thing. You know, that was very damaging to them too. But this whole idea of like sort of infiltrating left-wing movements, you know, agitating against the war domestically. There was surveillance. There was assassination of foreign leaders, and overturning governments. 3 Days of the Condor? Oh yeah,
where he's supposed to be a CIA.
Yeah.
Robert Redford. He's supposed to be a CIA analyst, and he turns against what they used to call the company. Has that sort of wonderful last scene where he gives the secrets to the New York Times, which was regarded as the opponent, the institutional opponent of the CIA. Now, of course, they are one. Right. Well, and that's another big sea change, right? Because it's just a whole another lot quote, of these and I don't have the story in front of me, but that story I was just referring to, there was a quote from a former CIA official. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting everybody's name, but I quoted it in my story where he was saying to the Washington Post that basically the CIA and the news media are effectively doing the same thing, right? We're out there in pursuit of the truth. And it's like, wait a second. And this is in the Washington Post. Right. And they quote this without any pushback or anything like that. And it's like, wow, the media and the news media and the CIA are engaged in the same project. That is a stunning remark, for both of them. Yeah, right. That they, instead of being institutional opponents, that they are engaged in the same project. Wow. Anyhow, that's where we are. Because there's really two things going on here. One is that the definition of what it meant to be left or a liberal seems to be dramatically shifting. Yeah. And then the other thing is that the people who were that unknown quantity to liberal politicians, that kind of middle American right-leaning voter, their attitudes are shifting in accordance with those shifts, right? Like they now. I think we are in the, and I want to hear Katie's opinion on this, because I think we are in the middle of a realignment, some kind of realignment. But I suspect it will be a realignment where, at the end of the day, people like me and Katie don't have a party. We're just simply left out.
Right. Yeah.
So instead of the Republicans taking up the old, FDR tradition, sort of Lyndon Johnson tradition, they'll become this Trumpist party that's just, into QAnon and various runs on conspiracy theories or something like that. Anyhow, that's my. I think that makes a lot of sense.
But we also shouldn't dismiss or underestimate the tradition of liberal hawkishness, the Democratic Party's hawkishness. I remember asking Ro Khanna on my show if he was surprised by, the Democrats not being more anti-war, and he's like, well, I mean, the Democrats are hawks. Like, look at how people who voted for the Iraq War. But you guys are speaking to also this, I guess, post-church committee realignment, where it wasn't cool to side with death squads anymore.
Yeah, and then you had Jimmy Carter, and everything changed when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, right. And then all of a sudden everybody swung back the other direction. But there was a time when that was. By the way, so Democratic hawks. Lyndon Johnson was a Democrat. The Vietnam War, that was Kennedy. Remember Bob Dole used to say, again, I'm older than you guys. Bob Dole used to say he called World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War, he called them Democrat wars.
Funny. Did he like them?
Well, he was in World War II. He got badly, grievously wounded. Yeah. But No, he was criticizing the Democratic Party for getting us into wars.
Right. Then there's
with
also
World
that
War
weird.
One. He did with World War II. Roosevelt didn't have a choice. We got bombed.
Doesn't everyone think that was a good war? I think so.
Just about.
Although,
but World
what's his
War One,
name?
he had a point with World War One. You know,
of
Woodrow
course.
Wilson, this idealistic.
That sucked. Yeah.
And every other country by 1917, when we got in, you guys don't want to hear me go on.
Yes, go.
By 1917, when we got into World War One, every other combatant nation was like, shit, how do we get out of this? This is the worst catastrophe. They're just, annihilating our youth. We're millions of people dying. How do we get out of it? The US was the only country that was enthusiastic about it. We got into that thing and we were like, this
But it
rocks.
solved so many problems, Tom.
Yeah, they could put people like people on the left, just throw them into prison while they're at it.
And then we didn't have to have a World War II. Oh wait,
yeah, that's right. There would be the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
Still, this is different from the traditional democratic hawkishness, right? Because obviously the neocons grew out of that kind of national security Democrat. Like they were a faction of the Democratic Party. They were, right, and then they kind of left after the Kennedy years. Yeah.
Exactly, and when the McGovern-Carter sort of shift happened, these were guys who were. Do you remember there was a guy called Scoop Jackson? He was a senator from Washington State.
Ran in 1972.
Yeah, but it was his staff that became the neocons. He was a typical like Great Society Democrat on domestic issues, but was like super hawkish. On foreign policy, and that's where the neocons started. Is they worked for him and they identified with him, and then Reagan comes along and they all shift. Like Jeane Kirkpatrick had been, I believe, a fairly left-wing Democrat, and then became Reagan's UN ambassador, one of the most hawkish of the neocons.
Right, but so that explains people like Bill Kristol, David Frum, like
PTSD, leftist PTSD. Yeah,
they come from that tradition. But what's interesting about this is it's the people who are like reading The Nation in the '80s who are now suddenly like okay with the CIA and the FBI. Like that's the part that's weird to me. Like
derangement syndrome.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder. I mean, like why haven't I gone down that? I mean, I read The Nation magazine in the 80s.
Me too, yeah.
Why? What happened? Well, how did I miss the boat on this? It just that's my life. Is one long succession of missing the boat. I used to be a conservative in the early 80s, like I was into Reagan before it was cool. I guess like late 70s. And I missed that boat too. I changed and I was like really into Walter Mondale. And then, I just continually picked the wrong team to be on. And now, he did, and we should talk about that. But now my team is in charge, and they're and I'm not on it anymore. I'm like a bench warmer now.
We should go back in time and tweak your political development a little bit.
Totally. Let's update your political resume.
We'll make you a Reaganite.
I could have been Grover Norquist,
right?
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
You could have flushed the government down the bathtub drain.
Drowned the bathtub. No, yeah, whatever. No, I mean that I used to, when I was studying those guys, I was always reminded of how similar my childhood had been to theirs, and how I was an early adopter of the very same things that they were, but somewhere along the line I gave up on it.
Yeah, what made you give up on it?
That's a long story. How did I stop being a conservative? I was 15. So Reagan made sense when you were 15. And you lived through the 70s, Carter, the hostage crisis, the Soviets invading Afghanistan, what else? OPEC, the world is falling apart. This happy little suburban world that you live in is falling apart. At the same time, you've got the on TV, remember Happy Days, this whole vision of the past where it's very glorious. And Reagan is that. Reagan, and when you're 15, Reagan works and Reagan is appealing. Now, once you go out into the real world, you discover instantly that it's just not like what he says, that, and especially once you take a job working for the minimum wage, which I did, and you discover instantly that it's like, oh, this capitalist world, it's not that awesome. In fact, it rather sucks.
Yeah, he had a lot of appeal. He had a lot of pop culture appeal in ways that people don't remember. Like I remember Sam Kinison doing those routines about how awesome it was when we bombed Olympia.
Well, compared to Carter, especially.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Who was so wooden and earnest, and remember the Malaise speech?
Yeah, the Malaise speech.
He was so philosophical.
Right.
And so negative. I mean, what a downer. Just if you go back and watch his speeches on YouTube, it's like they're depressing just to watch. Yeah. to talk about COVID now that we're done. How was your pandemic? What did you guys do during the pandemic? When are we going to actually do this in person? And when you guys used to do it in person, where did you do it? Did you meet halfway?
Well, we're going to have
Rolling
to
Stone, yeah,
Rolling Stone's offices.
New place, yeah.
Who's going to sponsor us, guys? Where should we do it, Matt? When are we going to do it in person again?
Well, okay, so here's a question. We've all been vaccinated. It's been told to everybody that we basically can't get it from being outside without a mask. But are you all wearing masks outside?
No.
I wore one yesterday. No, I wore it when I went to a store, but not.
Well, you're not done yet. You just had your shot.
Yeah.
No, I don't wear it outside. I do remember though. Now here I'm going to change the subject on you. Tell pandemic stories. I was in Kansas City for a big part of the pandemic. You guys interviewed me when I was there. Remember, I was in my childhood bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And my dad is 92, and so I was there to look after him. And I was very concerned. I didn't want him catching this thing. And at one point, I took him to Luce Park in Kansas City, which is a very nice park. The roses were in bloom. And there were all of these people in the rose garden, and they were not wearing masks. And I was so scared. And of course, I had mine on and all that, but they didn't have theirs on, and they were kids running around, and I didn't know what to think. And I was really upset for several days. The funny thing, none of us caught it. In my immediate family, we were extremely fortunate. How about you guys?
Very fortunate also. My dad's a hypochondriac, so he kept thinking he had it, but he did have another health issue. So I'm glad he was a hypochondriac. It turns out that was good because he got something checked out. And I've been away, not in the city. I went to the city twice to get vaccinated. And it's weird because I'm not to be TMI, but I used to have a roommate, and then right at the beginning of COVID, she moved out. There's nothing actually TMI about that. And so I actually felt like I'd be up at my parents' place, which is, in New York State, but not in the city. I'm actually although this is more of an isolated ghost town in some ways, it's a small town. We live right near Main Street. So I actually feel less isolated than I think I would have in the city. And it was less weird because had I been in New York City, that's my norm, the status quo, right? So I think I would have felt a real difference. Whereas when I'm up here, it's already different. It's already slower and quieter than it is in the city. So, but I'm getting a little stir crazy, but it's also beautiful up here.
Isn't that the weirdest thing for me about COVID is that in the midst of this world historical catastrophe, which it is, in the midst of this, there's been these scenes that are just incredibly beautiful. So I'm here in Bethesda now. Bethesda is one of the nicest places in America, all the flowers blooming and the flowering trees. And at the beginning of COVID, there was no traffic on the streets. And you would walk around, and the ironic juxtaposition of this terrible thing happening, and then your immediate surroundings are just spectacular. It was really creepy or awesome or whatever. I don't know how you want to put it.
I mean, I live in the country, and clearly one of the first results of COVID was that a lot of people realized that they were working too much, and B, they were too online. That I think for a lot of people in the first months of COVID were a period of where people felt better mentally. I definitely noticed that with some people that I was close with. But since it's gone on, I don't know. There's been a couple of things that I think are going to have a permanent effect on the culture that I'm not so sure are good. There's this kind of permanent paranoia about risk of any kind that I think has infected our culture, especially our political culture. This idea that we can't tolerate even the smallest amount of a possibility of getting sick, right? So even when doctors are saying we should be able to go outside without a mask, we're not doing it. I'm not doing it still, right?
Oh, that's interesting because there's of course all sorts of aspects of life where you drive your car on the highway.
Exactly. And but we've been conditioned now after a year of this to ramp down our tolerance for what's okay in terms of risk. And I think it's been encouraged in terms of the press propaganda about this has been really aggressive to get people to be super afraid of any
yes. So in that sense, Matt, it's like a press campaign from the old days where they'd get say some consumer product that's harmful, and then they go absolutely berserk about it until the company withdraws the product or fill in the blank with whatever it is.
Right. until everybody decides that we have to go in to get rid of Saddam Hussein because he's the worst.
Yeah.
He's like the biggest thing since Hitler. Like it's the same kind of like relentless, nonstop campaign of freaking people out, and I don't think they're unfreaked out. You know, even though there's the light should be at the end of the tunnel. If you look at the tenor of the news coverage about it, they seem to be very reluctant to go towards good news. Like they don't want to stress anything that's positive, even if it's not like a right-wing fantasy, even if it's just strictly scientifically good news, right? Like the vaccines work, like that's a good thing. People are not getting reinfected, except a very small number of people, and if they do get it, they're not getting seriously sick. You know, that's weird. I think there's going to be some sorting out that has to be done with that.
Of course, that will never happen. There will be no sorting out.
Right.
Right.
Well, of course. Right. Yeah. Then there's the surveillance, the sort of additional laws,
The scolding.
the scolding. Right. What's that about? Like, I mean, that part of
That's the part that fascinates me. There's the two sides of it: the scolding on the sort of liberal, highly educated side, and then the scofflaws on the Republican side. Which when I was out in Kansas over the summer, those guys were everywhere. You don't see them here in Bethesda, but like
Why are you wearing a mask? Like,
yeah. So I drove out to I drove to Colorado. I went hiking in Rocky Mountain. On the way, I stopped at one of my favorite restaurants in the world in Salina, Kansas. I probably shouldn't tell you where this happened. Anyhow, it doesn't matter.
All right.
Nobody was.
Yeah, you have to tell me what restaurant this is later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that some other time. But anyhow, once you get outside the big city, there was very few people wearing masks, and I tried to talk to people about it, and they just thought the whole thing was ridiculous.
But you're right. It's almost like a polar opposite kind of a thing. Like you'll get people in your face about why are you bothering to wear a mask? Right?
Yes, and people give you shit for wearing one.
Right, and then you'll go to a different city, or especially if you go to cities, and you'll get the glares in the other direction, or even people will say stuff to you if you even temporarily. Now, I've only seen that happen to other people because I typically wear a mask, but people have gotten intense about it. They've politicized the thing to a degree that I didn't expect to see that happen.
Ooh, what do you mean?
Well, they've politicized like the whole issue of wearing masks versus not wearing masks has become a litmus test politically for people in a way that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. On both sides, it doesn't make any sense.
On both sides. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a time when it felt like it was clear which side was in the right, but
well,
now everything has changed.
What do you mean?
I mean, you don't. So there's a story I just read it might have been in the New York Times, it might have been in the Atlantic, but pointing out that in Brookline, they had all these people who are still wearing masks outside, even though they've been vaccinated. They don't need to.
I know why that is.
They're going way beyond the CDC guidelines.
I'm the only one who can say it, though.
Because it's a Jewish thing?
Yeah.
Why?
We're neurotic. And a lot of doctors, and we err on the side of, except for the Hasids, who.
That's funny. That was not the explanation they gave.
Who's they?
the journalist, the story.
Oh, okay. They can't. They need me to say. Yeah. No. What was the explanation they gave?
Like safetyism.
But it's symbolism, right? Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
No, there's this whole idea that being a good citizen now involves this kind of a self-deprecating asceticism. Like you're supposed to not stress out the culture by going out, by socializing, by doing things that might somehow create risk generally for the population, right? So people have been expressing their political beliefs about that by staying indoors, wearing a mask absolutely everywhere. There's resentment that's been generated towards people who don't have the same attitude. But at the same time, you'll get the opposite thing if you walk around in the middle of a small town in Louisiana and you got a mask on outside. They'll give you a hard time for that. I think the whole thing is really strange.
Isn't it? Better. There is something to I'm not saying like staying inside after they say it's safe, but there is something to protecting other people.
Yes.
Right. When you were wearing masks.
Important point, Katie Halper.
Yeah.
The word here is solidarity. So at the beginning of the crisis, we were all talking about like we're going to rediscover the sense of solidarity that we've lost in America. And we have lost any sense of social, solidarity. The glue that holds us together is long since dissolved. And you know what? That didn't happen. The opposite happened. We're at each other's throats in this sort of extreme way, thanks to social media. and that
Yeah.
brilliant
Yeah.
algorithm that whatever his name is.
But once you've been vaccinated,
Yeah.
I think once you've been vaccinated, there's not really a reason to have a mask on, especially outside.
Yeah, I'm just saying throughout the pandemic, though, I think it's a bit of a false equivalency to paint the pre-vaccinated period that way, because I do think like erring on the side of protecting others. I mean, what really drove me crazy was when people who were like, well, I'm fine, I'm not going to get it. But that's not really how it works. Like you can give it to other people, you can carry it, that drove me crazy. So
no, you're exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the way the left handled it could have been better. The way the left handled the right wing conservative, to the extent, it's not like all conservatives, but to where there was resistance to mask, I do think that the left could have been less contemptuous, as almost always.
That's totally, but that's always the problem.
Yeah.
So, okay. I want to ask
where
you
we're
guys
going now, Thomas.
What did you read during the pandemic? Because when I read all of these World War II novels, what?
Really?
I'm so embarrassed. I only read articles,
about books,
no
Katie
books.
Halper.
I started reading The Plague.
What you're muttering.
I'm embarrassed that I didn't read books. No, I'm embarrassed. I started reading The Plague. I started reading a Patricia Highsmith novel.
The Plague, the Camus.
Yeah. I thought it was on brand. It was appropriate, but I didn't.
But it turned out to be an elaborate metaphor about man's essential, blah blah blah. I mean, it was plague reading for plague times. Alone in the universe. So
right.
the one that I decided to read along those lines was Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year from 1665 or whatever.
Love that. Great actor, Willem Dafoe. Just kidding.
Well, anyhow,
it's funny because I actually reread Robinson Crusoe last night.
I read that too after I read the Journal of the Plague Year, and I decided it was really good. I went and got Robinson Crusoe.
Great book.
The Plague Year, it starts out, it's very slow, but by the end of it, there are all of these these people were going through exactly the same thing as us. Now, I did not know this about the Black Plague, but apparently people could have it and not know they had it, and they could spread it without knowing it. So the asymptomatic thing, there's all of these weird resonances with what's been happening to us. But one of the things that he says right at the very start is, what do you do when you hear a plague is coming? When it started in some place that's near you, but not, what do you do? And everyone knew the answer back then. You run, you pack up your shit and you leave, you go hide somewhere.
Excellent. Yeah.
We didn't do that this time.
No.
Well, actually, Katie, you did, right? You're not in New York City.
Yeah, I haven't been. Yeah.
See, what did I read? I read a huge book of I.B. Singer stories.
Who is that?
And then I started reading.
I don't know who that is.
Isaac Bashevis Singer.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, I started reading a lot of poetry over the summer. Like I read.
Oh, you should have recited it on
Archibald MacLeish poems and Auden, and but part of it was because I found that I just didn't have the attention span to do the huge novels for some reason during this period. I don't know what that was about.
That's admirable. That's reading poetry. That's no, we look up to you.
It's pretentious.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
I don't like.
No, but
that,
hey, I liked Auden once upon a time, but that was that's because I had to read him for school. But I got I've had insomnia all my life, but I discovered how to deal with it during COVID, which is I wake up in the middle of the night, and instead of lying there in bed and tossing and turning, I go into another room with my novel and read for 3 hours, and then go back to bed. And so I did knock off a huge number of very large, very thick novels. I said, so that when COVID first started, I said, we're going to be inside, we're going to be in this house for a really long time, as we have been. And there was a friend of mine sent me an article that the Washington Post ran in the 80s, listing all the World War II novels ever published in this country, beginning in 1945 and going up to what was then the present, the 1980s. And with the author of the article pointing out which ones he thought were the best. And I'd read a lot of them, like Gravity's Rainbow, Catch-22, but I hadn't read, there's all of these ones from the 40s and 50s that are forgotten and not read any longer. And so I read them all.
Wow.
And I read The Naked and the Dead, which Norman Mailer's first novel, quite good, really good. I read, there's one called The Young Lions. They made a movie of it. The movie kind of sucks, but it has Marlon Brando in it. But the novel is excellent. I read one called, now this is one nobody reads anymore. There's an author called James Gould Cozzens, who I think was a political conservative. I don't know. Right. He wrote in that era, in the 40s and 50s, wrote a series of like extremely long novels, like 1,000-pagers, about the sort of inner life of professionals. And he wrote one about these guys, during these officers at this base in Florida during World War II. And you're reading this like being like, there's no way I'm going to like this, but it was engrossing. Like I couldn't put it down. I read the whole goddamn, and it takes place in course of 3 days in 1943. And I don't think, they do leave the base very briefly, but it's actually fantastic. Anyhow.
Excellent.
And on and on and on and on.
Maybe for the next
pandemic. Hey, that's the other question.
Yeah, a pandemic reading list. Yeah.
Is there going to be another? I mean, now that this is over, and this has never really happened before in our lives.
Over, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, okay, but it's winding down. But we didn't react this way, as I read in the Wall Street Journal the other day, to the flu in the 1950s, which was almost as virulent as this. We certainly didn't act this way in 1918, 1919. In fact, they never mentioned it. One of the things I read very early on in the pandemic was a popular history of the 20s. It was called Only Yesterday. You guys have probably read this. It was very popular once. And it's very easy read. It's a lot of fun. And it starts with the end of World War I. And he mentions the flu epidemic of 1919, which, as we know, is much more deadly than COVID and, decimated. It killed it especially killed young and healthy people, which made it much more tragic. And he mentions it for exactly one sentence. It was just like, by the time, as soon as it was over, they just blinked it out of the people forgot about it, never talked about it again.
Right. Yeah. No, but that's because we live in a generation, I think, that has, I think this gets back to what I was talking about before. It just has a much lower tolerance for death risk. In previous generations, they had gone through a lot. They had gone through wars, and the idea of, look, there's this disease. We have to take precautions, but we got to live too. Like, it's different from the attitude now. People just have zero ability to figure in any level of acceptable risk, I think. Yeah.
One last fun fact. They called it the Spanish flu, the 1919. Right. But you know where it really came from?
It did not come from Spain.
No, it came from Kansas. It was the Kansas flu.
It came from you, Tom.
Not me. The first recorded case was at this big army base in Great Bend, Kansas. It's called Fort Riley in Kansas. And because it was during a war, they were, obviously drafting millions of people, were cramming them into these army bases. And so a flu that came from, some Lord knows where, spread like wildfire in this army base. And then from there branched out, got to Europe, went across the Atlantic, was in all the different armies and everything. Yeah. The Kansas flu.
That's right. They should have said that instead of the Spanish flu.
Yeah, seriously.
People would have avoided Kansas like the plague after that, right?
Yeah, you should rebrand that. You should own that.
I should make a line of T-shirts that says the Kansas flu.
Tom, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you and your work?
Katie, I'm glad you asked that. If they go to tcfrank.com, they'll discover that I am the chief content provider of tcfrank.com.
Who would have thunk?
Right here on the internet.
Oh, happy birthday, Karl Marx.
I meant to say I started reading Marx in the pandemic. All my life I'd never read Marx except for like the little snippets that you have to read when you're in graduate school or undergrad or whatever. But I finally got out. It happened because I was reading Edmund Wilson, To the Finland Station, which is about the writing and acting of history, and has about half of it is about Marx. And I actually enjoyed the Edmund Wilson book, which is a first. I read it when I was in graduate school and didn't think very highly of it, but this time I really enjoyed it. And so I got Marx out. I got out a copy of 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon.
Yeah.
And goddamn, it's almost impossible to understand because there's
very hard. Yeah,
there's so many particular references to things at the time that you and I weren't there for. We don't know anything about France in the 1840s and 50s. Wow. Anyhow, but the Edmund Wilson, that was great.
Oh, guess who said this? Ready? I'm going to read a quote. Ready? Throughout the New Deal era, the relief program was the biggest weapon ever placed in the hands of those who sought power and votes. If the average American had been asked flatly to abandon his rights as a citizen and to submit to a personal rule, he would have chewed tobacco and spit white lime. But under relief, dependent upon the government for their daily bread, men gradually relaxed their watchfulness and submitted to the will of the little white father, more or less. Once they had weakened that far, it was easy to go on and on, voting for more relief and leaving government affairs in the hands of a few. The change from a republic to a dictatorship was imperceptibly pushed ahead.
Okay, it sounds like a Bircher, but the little white father thing is, I mean, that sounds like straight up John Birch Society boilerplate,
Right?
And it's not Ayn Rand; it's too direct. Ayn Rand would not write like that.
Right.
Okay, tell me.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Oh, I was going to say that because you mentioned her earlier.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
like, the woman that Miss CIA
man.
quotes.
Okay, that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, that is some kind of CIA. They are really messing with us.
But is
that the actual essay that she's referring to in the CIA?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. That comes from an article, but the essay she's actually referring to, which is like Colored Me or something, definitely is like a rejection of, it's kind of post-racial. How It Feels to Be Colored Me is an essay by Zora Neale Hurston published in World Tomorrow as a white journal sympathetic to Harlem Renaissance writers, illustrating her circumstance as an African-American woman in the early 20th century in America. She's not tragically colored.
Yeah.
At times, I have no race. I am just me. I have no separate feelings about being an American citizen and colored, which actually does fit very nicely with the CIA messaging.
This is really fascinating because the CIA wouldn't just, do they name check the essay? They do,
I think, well, Zora Neale Hurston, to be fair, has really been spun as just kind of an anti-racist feminist because of Their Eyes Were Watching God, the novel she wrote. But yeah, she's definitely not. She supported Taft.
Taft was running against Ike. So Taft was a Republican who lost in the primaries in the 50s. But Taft was the most conservative. He was the leader of the conservative faction of the Republican Party in those days. So
okay, yes. So she opposed FDR separately, not at the same time. Yeah.
If the CIA actually name checks the essay, then they are specifically drawing your attention to an essay. That's a weird move on their behalf. I mean, they do stuff like that on purpose. That's not random.
I mean, that's a good question. I kind of think if they just Googled, I had to Google a lot. I vaguely remembered that she was an anti-communist because I remember these quotes, but I forgot how conservative she was. So I think if they just Googled that, it's hard to see that it's actually a rejection. It almost seems anti-racist because it's kind of post-racial. Yeah. And you'd have to track down her writing on the New Deal, her quotes on the New Deal and communism to figure it out. And again, Their Eyes Were Watching God is just praised as a very intersectional book. So, but that's a good question. I mean, CIA, you should hire me because you probably missed that. I don't think a lot of people would have caught on, would have pointed out that Zora Neale Hurston is actually conservative.
Yeah, not that many people would know that. I didn't. Yeah. I certainly didn't know that.
Yeah, it's very underexposed. I'm gonna have to get that essay, read the whole thing. But it's pretty funny. It really lands. It really fits.
All right, you want me to sing the outro song?
Sure, yeah. Well, Tom, this has been great. And yeah, you did a great job on Bill Maher, and I'm too bad you don't remember what you said, but
well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Halper.
All right, Frank.
So long.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much. Bye. So here's the deal. Ready, guys? Joshua Shenk, which is an unfortunate name, he was the editor of The Believer magazine. Reading at the LA Times, which I believe broke the story, Joshua Wolf Shenk, author of the books Lincoln's Melancholy and Powers of Two, has resigned from his position as editor-in-chief of The Believer magazine and artistic and executive director of the Black Mountain Institute. On March 24th, staff of the Institute, a literary arts center within the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the publisher of The Believer magazine, were notified via email that Shenk, 50, had resigned and that John P. Tubman, sounds like Tubman, interesting, associate dean for faculty at the university, would step in as its acting executive director. In a farewell letter shared with the staff, Shenk said his resignation followed, quote, a dumb, reckless choice to disregard appropriate setting and attire for a Zoom meeting. I crossed a line that I can't walk back over. I sorely regret the harm to you and by extension to the people we serve. I'm sorry, end quote. The incident occurred during a video meeting in early February with about a dozen staff members of The Believer and BMI. According to Ira Silverberg, a literary agent and editor who was acting as Shenk's advisor, Shenk was soaking in a bathtub with Epsom salts during the meeting to alleviate nerve pain caused by fibromyalgia. He had chosen a virtual background to mask his location and had worn a mesh shirt. When Shenk's computer battery died, he got up to plug it in, believing the camera was off, but the video kept running. According to Silverberg, Shenk reported the incident immediately. In a statement to the Times, Shenk apologized for the pain the incident caused to the BMI staff, who he called the most talented, devoted, and creative people I've ever worked with. After my lapse in judgment, I decided to resign so that BMI's work could best continue in their exceptionally capable hands. At least 2 witnesses reported the incident to the university's Office of Equal Employment and Title IX. University of Las Vegas dismissed and closed the Title IX complaints when Shenk resigned, according to emails the complainants received from the university, which the Times obtained. Josh never tried to do anything but take responsibility and help the staff move on, Silverberg said. Indeed, he has spent most of the last few months working with medical people to try to address the illness, for which he's seen dozens of doctors over 3 decades without success. Here's the thing. He got into a lot of trouble, and I kind of stuck my neck out because I think that the conversation about it really lacks nuance. Now, some of you are going to say, what nuance should you have in a conversation about a guy who...
Yeah, Katie, what nuance are you going to have?
Well,
in a
okay,
conversation about
and
a
I have to
guy
return who exposes his junk to his colleagues. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Tubin quickly, zoom and Tubin. There's a couple questions. One is whether it's appropriate to fire the person. Now, in this case, he wasn't fired. He resigned. But going to the Tubin thing where he was fired, there's a couple questions. There's what should be done in terms of the employment, and then there's how should this person be seen. And to me, the zoom and Tubin thing, and this is, of course, when he was caught masturbating on Zoom unwittingly. A lot of the conversation about that was about, like, what? Why are you laughing?
I'm just trying to
see where it's going to go.
No, suddenly it just struck me what his thought process must have been deciding to do that. But go ahead.
Here's the thing. A lot of the conversation about that was like framed as a discussion of privilege. A lot of people were like, a woman would never be able to get away with that. And that's true, but that's race to the bottomism. Instead of fighting for a world where men get fired for masturbating on camera accidentally, what if we fought for a world where women didn't get fired for that?
Yeah, I think a woman could get away with that more easily. But anyway,
oh, really? Now they could, maybe now, because the pendulum has swung.
Just in terms of being detected.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. But no, but this is, we're doing the parallel. Like, it has to be visible, right? I do think also that it's very different to do this during a meeting. And what constantly gets lost in this conversation is that what Tubin was participating in was something with the New Yorker, and it was a role play where you had Republicans, Democrats, and he represented the courts. Mm-hmm. And there was a time during this role play where the Democrats and Republicans were like strategizing together. The court, he was not part of this meeting. I think that's very relevant because
he had to pass the time somehow.
Well, yeah, sure. He had to pass time somehow. And he wasn't like talking to people while he was doing it. So really, I feel like that got lost in the story. It was really a between meetings session. And I think that it is important because if he had been doing it during a meeting, that makes it very different from between meetings.
Okay.
Okay, so there's that. And if he's doing it like on purpose, I really think the accidental nature of it is a game changer. Again, this doesn't mean that doesn't make it professional. I'm not, I guess it's grounds for termination, but it reminds me a bit of the conversation about like affluenza, when a rich white kid is acquitted for a crime that a poor black kid would be locked up forever for. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the tendency is, let's lock this kid up forever, the white spoiled kid. But we need to be fighting for a world where young black, poor black people are not incarcerated. Mm-hmm. Not for a world where white people, privileged people are. Mm-hmm. So that is an important part of the conversation, I think, which is what I refer to as race to the bottomism. Mm. And in this case, with the Shenk thing, It's just like everyone reads into it that it's an abuse of power and that it was exhibitionistic. I don't think it was exhibitionistic. And I think that makes a huge difference. And no one will, everyone's like, intention, this is all based on a Twitter discourse, but people are like, intention doesn't matter. But yeah, it does. Of course it matters.
I mean, of course intention matters, but not to lots of people these days.
Right.
So, yeah.
Like if someone's walking down the street and their pants fall down and their penis is visible, that is very different from someone exposing themselves to someone.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Now, he had a blurred background, so he thought that no one would see he was in the bath, which again, people seem to think is important. But here's where I'm a little, what's with the mesh shirt? That I'm not sure about.
Is that like a Borat, like sexy time thing?
Yeah,
like...
I don't get the mesh shirt. And then, of course, if he is, and then people are like, he could have not taken a bath. Yeah, of course that was stupid. No one's disputing that. And no one's talking about the health, the pain that he was going through.
It's too many people trying to get too many people fired for shit. Like, okay, it's humiliating.
Yeah.
And probably you should sit down and have a talk with the guy. Like, you know what? Like maybe the bath with the mesh shirt and the Epsom salts is not the way to go. Although
the Epsom salts are a bit mitigating. A bit exonerating because it shows,
he
was if it was a bubble bath, forget it.
Yeah, right. If it was
a bath bomb, that's
edible cherry oil or something like that, right? I mean,
cool.
Not that I have any of that in my house, but yeah. Torch-bearing, like Frankensteinian mobs that like rise up out of these situations they're so weird. Like Jeffrey Toobin for the rest of his life is going to be the guy who like introduces himself and people are going to be like, oh, you're the guy who was whacking off in a New Yorker meeting. Like he's going to go to his grave with that, like,
it'll be on his headstone.
Right. So additionally, like we have to make sure he never works again. Like,
there's so many examples of, the other thing is I have a real problem with the privilege discourse because there are indeed a lot of examples of double standards of men getting away with things that women don't get away with, but it becomes so it's a structural issue. And yes, people should check their privilege, but like it also is not on that individual person. It's a systemic thing again. And like people who engage in this analysis in theory, like care about power dynamics, that has to be structural, not individual.
I don't know. The Toobin thing was worse because like you're clearly having, sexual thoughts in the middle of a meeting with your colleagues, which is like not cool. But the problem with the way people talk about this stuff is that if you have any kind of take on this that isn't exactly what everybody else is saying, the first place they go is you're a right winger, you're a MAGA person, you're in league with X, Y, and Z, and you can't have there isn't any way to have like a rational discussion about any of these things. Like, I think I would pretty much agree that you can't have an employee who's like jerking off during a meeting. I mean,
not during.
Was it during?
Between. No, because he didn't have to participate in this role play thing.
Okay. Still.
Yeah, you could say that, but also there's some ageism. There's some ageism in there. Technology.
Yeah, I mean, like it depends. I don't know that that's like but in this guy's case, there's just this tendency now to like, let's write a group letter about our boss because we don't like him. Let's pick out 90 things that make us uncomfortable or whatever it is. Like, I think you have to make pretty hard lines about what is an unacceptable and acceptable behavior. Pretty clearly, sexual harassment is unacceptable behavior, but there's a pretty clear definition of what that is normally,
I just still think that like we can be smarter and less like reductive in our discussion about it. Can we just read? I feel like, our viewers and listeners want a more classical, probably. Isn't that terrible? So I just put something in there that you can just read the headline of.
McDonald's served us feces-covered fries, New Jersey family says in lawsuit. A New Jersey woman has filed suit against McDonald's restaurant near her home, claiming she and her daughter ate fries that were covered in human feces. Amanda Bourdois, 32 of Cumberland County, says in court papers that her husband and daughter bought food in a paper bag On January 13th, from the restaurant's drive-thru in the 1000 block of North High Street in Millville. When they got home, Bourgeois and her daughter started eating fries from the bag, which also contained a burger. States the suit. After eating some fries from the McDonald's bag, the child reached in the bag and took out a burger and noticed a brown substance all over the wrapper, the suit states. At the time, Bourgeois noticed and smelled such a horrible stench from the substance on the burger. To their disbelief and shock, plaintiffs realized what they had just ingested was human feces, which was touching their french fries in the same bag, and that was all over the child's hand and the wrapper of the burger. The child immediately vomited and washed her hands as the mother threw away the remaining food. That sounds pretty bad. I mean, eating shit is up there. I guess I guess that's a lawsuit.
Oh, so they had already eaten some of it.
Yeah.
That's like the word. How did they not realize that? Not to shame them. I don't want to victim blame.
I guess it was just sort of worse by degrees than just normally the french fries.
Just a hint of shit.
I wonder how many times each of us has inadvertently eaten shit. I bet it's more often than you would think.
But I feel like there's a difference between if you're aware of it, that's a real amount of
suffering
and shit.
I feel like if you voluntarily eat it.
Oh, I wasn't. Oh no, I mean I feel like now I have to defend. That's like that puts necrophilia. That makes necrophilia look super healthy. Well, it is
really
actually, which is more unhealthy? I wonder. Isn't it a major health risk? That people voluntarily do that. That's so gross.
Would you rather eat shit or have sex with a dead body?
Oh my God, I can't believe that. We're finally going there. Okay, but really? I mean, eating shit.
You would eat shit first?
Yeah. But what about just fondling? I would fondle a dead body.
You would fondle a dead body, but you wouldn't penetrate a dead body.
No. Well, that would, no.
Right, yeah.
That requires more finagling. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
You?
It's a close one.
It's a close one, right?
It really depends on what's involved.
I think that one is probably more of a health risk.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to
ingest.
I don't want to be snuggling with a disease-ridden.
Oh, that's fine. To a necro snuggle, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, it also depends on the state of the body. Let's say fresh. I think
weird, we're making podcast history here.
I know we are. We may have to bleep out a bunch of this, but like we should just bleep out so people don't even know what we're talking about and blow our mouths. I think that'd be good, but. I don't know. I think that there's like a visceral, not that we were bred to have sex with dead people the way we are to have sex with live people, but I think that I have more of a visceral, I feel like it's an evolutionary thing. Like I have more of a visceral recoiling at the eating shit. And I think that's because, biologically we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, well, I knew that was going to be your answer.
Did you? I'm so predictable.
Yeah.
I don't know though. I think everyone's going to be if you ask people that, I think the socially sanctioned answer would be rather eat shit. That's what the sanitize, that's the answer that the society tells you. There's so much peer pressure to accept eating shit when given that as a choice.
I mean, it also depends on whose corpse it is.
I guess so, yeah.
Right? I mean, if it's
Henry Kissinger's.
Okay, that's at the extreme. Like Henry Kissinger's at the extreme end of the kind of body that you wouldn't want to have any kind of sex with.
Right. Not live, not dead.
Which dead U.S. senator would you have sex with?
But we're not supposed to threaten. Can you? Oh, if they're dead, can we threaten dead presidents? Not threaten, but can we say we would like to kill them?
I don't think you can.
It's not a threat.
They might take it the wrong way.
Like the FBI?
Yeah.
Sometimes they have no sense of humor about these things. It really sucks. It's a drag. Robert Byrd. That's okay.
Robert Byrd?
Yeah, he's dead. Strom Thurmond, dead.
Strom Thurmond.
Totally qualified for the sex conversation.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah. So but you'd probably rather eat shit than you would rather have sex with Robert Byrd than eat shit.
I don't know. What do you won't? You keep asking me, but I don't hear you say anything.
I'd eat the shit.
Okay. Now we know.